Hello and welcome to today's episode of Authentic Achievements, where I really wanted to delve into the topic of curiosity. For many years, particularly when I was in the throes of crippling self-doubt and possibly, if I wanted to find a label, struggling with my own inner imposter, I used to tell everybody that I'd made my career asking the dumb girl questions, asking the stupid questions that nobody else would ask. But as I've continued to grow and develop and found some inner confidence, I realized it wasn't actually the dumb girl questions. I made my career by being passionately curious about why I thought what I thought, why other people thought what they thought. And that curiosity enabled me to take on new challenges, to lead major transformations seemingly effortlessly. Because I think one of the things that we've forgotten is to be curious. We're so busy worrying about what people think about us and trying to ensure that we remain seeming like we know what's going on, looking like we're in control, that actually any sign that we don't know what's going on is deemed a sign of weakness. And yet it really is a sign of strength. It takes courage to be vulnerable enough to tell people, I don't know that, I don't know the answer. But also to be willing to want to learn it, to want to say, but I want to know. And who can tell me, who can teach me this? One of the fastest growing industries right now is the knowledge industry, because we have a thirst for that knowledge. We want to know how to do more things. We want to be able to make our lives easier, swifter, more simple. And yet we don't outwardly share that curiosity. And in leadership, I've seen it be one of the greatest skills. Some of the best leaders that I've had the privilege of working with are passionately curious. They ask those inquisitive questions. They want to know more, even if they have a different opinion to you, rather than just asking enough questions to prove themselves right. They ask enough questions to see if they can actually prove themselves wrong. And that's the linchpin that unlocks all of those opportunities to innovate, to think differently, to create ideas, solutions that just wouldn't be here without them. If we think about all the great inventions that there's ever been, even finding new land, all came down to someone who'd got passionate curiosity and a belief that they could find it, that they could do something differently about it. We think about children and their amazing capacity to develop, to learn new things that would overwhelm us if we had to learn them today. Things like learning how to walk for the first time, talk for the first time, learn a language from scratch, all those things that we can do, but they seem daunting, they seem overwhelming to us as adults. As children, we fly at those with a sense of wonder and engagement. And it's because children are curious. They're curious about everything. Anybody like me who has, well, I've got a 7-year-old, but certainly when she was a little bit younger, and they go through the why stage, but why is this, why that, why the other? And it can feel like it's never going to end. But actually, all they're doing is trying to make sense of their world, trying to make sense of what's going on, why it's going on, where is it coming from. And I think once we develop that as adults, we can actually start to make really complex situations much simpler. When people are coming at things from a position of curiosity, there's no judgment. There's no, if I say opposite to you, then I'm going to be wrong, because they're just interested. They're intrigued. You know, when I look at, if I ever end up in a difficult situation with somebody, I question myself as much as I question them. I wonder why I'm so adamant that this is the right answer. I wonder how they've got to their conclusion. And the only way I'm going to know that is to ask better questions, to understand. And I think that's, for me, has been one of my greatest lessons in life, was learning to listen, to understand, and not interject. I used to ask enough questions to give me the answer that I thought I already knew. And I saw that running sales teams all of the time. They would ask enough questions for them to be able to pitch the product, instead of asking enough questions until the client really understood the problem that you were solving and were ready for it to be solved. So I think being comfortable in asking more questions, in being comfortable in being that open curiosity, is going to be what helps us move on to this next stage, this next evolution as leaders, as to how do we lead in these evolving times? How do we ensure that we keep our workforce engaged? How do we deal with the diversity and inclusion of all the elements? So that could be race, it could be gender, it could be neurodiversity, all of those things. The only way we're going to really understand how to integrate those, how to make everybody feel included, is to be really curious about how does it feel to right now, and how do we make it feel better, and what are the things that we're doing that we don't realize are actually setting us back rather than moving us forward. Because I believe most people's intentions are honourable. We don't start out thinking, how do I get this wrong? We instead start out trying to get it right, trying to leave things better than we found them, trying to make a positive impact. But that doesn't mean we always get it right. And I remember once delivering some feedback to somebody, and this poor soul had been kicked around an organisation because they were quite difficult. And eventually they got moved from pillar to post, and they were only still there because they were a member of the family. And yet nobody wanted to work with them. And I was giving this person a disciplinary, and they were just like, I'll just sign it. And I was like, you can't just sign it, because you don't understand what it is that you're doing that we need you to change. And because you don't understand it, you'll do it again. And that means in a few weeks' time, we could be having a very different conversation. And that doesn't feel right. And then I remember thinking about it and thinking, let me try at it from a different angle. So I sat down with her and I said, let's try it from a different place. Let me start with what I think your intentions are, and just check whether or not I'm right. Am I on the right lines? Is this what you're trying to achieve? So I went through all of her intentions. I think you intend to be a great team member. I think you've got a real passion for the organisation. I think you want it to succeed. I think you want everybody to think well about the organisation. Would I be right in that? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. It's like, brilliant, because that's exactly what we'd like you to do. But can I just explain the impact you're having? Because while that's what you're trying to do, what actually happens is people hold their breath when you come in the morning to see what mood you're in, because that's going to set the tone for the whole day. If something is done in a slightly different way to the way that you thought it was going to be done, instead of just being curious and asking more questions about it, you will literally go toe to toe with somebody and be screaming at them. And I know you don't mean to be screaming at them, you're frustrated with what's going on, but the impact is people are scared. People don't want to work with you because they're nervous, and yet they love you and see you as a friend. And you saw in the moment where actually she understood how the impact of what she was doing was very different from her intention. And then we could actually work together on, how do we fix this? How do we find a safe space for you to be able to work through when you get frustrated with these things, and find a calmer way of being able to talk about it? And a lot of that is finding a space where you can take away some of the emotion, where you can actually get people to know that we are not here to attack. We're not here to make them look wrong or to make them uncomfortable. There's a great book that I share with lots of clients, which is the Crucial Conversations book. And it talks about the fact that in life, whether that's in work or outside of work, there are moments when we have a conversation that becomes crucial. And what they mean by that is one that's fueled by emotion. One or both parties are actually coming at it from a position of fear of being made to look wrong, fear of being lied to, fear of being made to look silly. Doesn't matter what the fear is, there's fear there. And as a result of that, when we are fearful, we feel under attack. And as we all know, the best form of defense is to attack. And so we go on the attack. We start to change our body language, our words we pick, the tone we use. And all of a sudden, this conversation gets very heated very quickly. And so the book shares this really simple 5 steps that I've been using now for about 11 years, and it really works. And the first one is to share a bit of vulnerability, to let the person know you're not here to attack them. You're not here, because you want to make them wrong. I was working with a client the other day, and I had to start the conversation with, I'm really conflicted about bringing this up. It's a really uncomfortable conversation to have. However, and this is the second step, share why you're doing it. I know I need to let you know, because if not, you're going to carry on with this behavior and you're going to be surprised by the impact it has, because no one's telling you. So that reason for telling you is you need to know. And then the third piece, set an intention for the conversation. So my third bit was, I'm completely committed to finding a solution that works for all of us. And the reason why that one is so important is when you can then share your next one, which is as a starter for 10, here's a suggested way forward. If the person goes, that's not going to work for me, it's like, that's fine. Because remember, our intention is we're going to find a solution that works for everybody. It allows you then to start having a debate down here where it's factual, instead of up here where we're playing still in that emotion. Because our emotional brain responds 24 times faster than our thinking brain. So we think we're nice, calm, logical human beings, but the reality is something happens and we make it mean something. And then we're now dealing with what we've made it mean rather than what actually happened. And that's where conflict comes from, because what we've made it mean is different to what the other person made it mean. But if we can open ourselves up to that passionate curiosity, if we can be willing to ask those questions, to seek to find the commonalities, then actually we can find that the conflict isn't as big as we thought it was, or in fact, isn't even there at all, because most conflict comes down to misunderstanding, misinformation, or miscommunication. And if we ask better questions, we can really get underneath that. We can understand why we've got that difference of opinion, and we can try and find a path back together. And when we do that, we create a culture around us where people also seek to understand. They seek to find those commonalities. And they seek to understand also why there are those differences of opinions, why there are different viewpoints, because we do live in a world of polarity. For every up, there's a down. For every left, there's a right. And one doesn't exist without the other. So until we get ourselves in a place where we are confident enough to be uncomfortable with the uncomfortable, then actually we're going to stop learning. And for me, that was probably my biggest lesson in leadership, was having to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I remember probably one of the biggest occasions where that happened was running my first ever major redundancy. Never a comfortable thing to do, never a nice thing to do. And I remember the day before we were about to make the announcement, it was a publicly listed company, so we had to follow market trading rules. And I was sat before the board and they were like, Kim, are we ready? I remember looking at them and saying, we're ready. We're as ready as we're ever going to be. And everybody looked horrified and were like, well, should we postpone? Should we wait? And I was like, no, what I mean by that is we've prepared for everything we can possibly prepare for. But what I can't prepare for, what I don't know and can never know, is what this piece of information is going to do when added to whatever burden the 1,800 people that we're going to tell tomorrow their jobs are at risk are already carrying. I can't know that. All I can do is be willing to hold the space for them to deal with the news however they need to deal with the news. I've got to be there and prepare and give them that space. And then I also remember standing up in front of the room of people and saying, the first thing I need you to remember is it is not happening because of you. This is not happening because of anything you did. It is happening to you. You are impacted, but it's not happening because of you. Because the reality is redundancies don't happen because of the people that are made redundant. Redundancies happen because something impacted the organization. something happened that meant the organisation wasn't able to navigate the storm it was going through. The people impacted by redundancy are the individuals. They're the people that have to live with it, but we never take the time to tell them it's not about them. It's not because of anything they did. It's not because they're not a great person. Because if they weren't performing, they would have been being managed out. Most people that are made redundant were actually performing really, really well. But the problem is, as a leader leading a redundancy, there's an element of guilt that we couldn't lead the organisation to a better outcome. We also know that no one's going to like the message unless it's people choosing to put themselves forward for redundancy. We know it's a bad message. We know it's a message no one's going to go, thanks for that. That's really made my day. And so as leaders, very often, we feel a little bit under attack. We think that no one's going to like the message and everyone's going to blame us. And so inadvertently, we actually change our language, we change our body tone, and we become cold. We become very scripted. It's very much, this is how you say it, this is where we're going. We're not willing to be vulnerable in those moments and say, I'm sorry. I stood up in front of those people and said, the reason we're here is quite simply, I couldn't lead us to a better outcome. And for that, I'm genuinely sorry. Now, I could have looked at that and said, the first one I ever did, I ran probably 2 months into starting at an organisation. The reality is I probably couldn't have turned that oil tank around any quicker than we managed to. We did have to make redundancies to go. My job as a leader, as it's always been, is to save as many jobs as humanly possible. And doing that by trying to get the business to grow, by trying to make sure that we are staying ahead of the market trends. But when that goes wrong, the only way that you can save as many jobs as you possibly can is sometimes to cut a few jobs out. But being able to share that with people, to stand in front of them and deal with their frustration, their anger. I had one lady who was very angry, quite rightly, and had lots to say. And I stood as she was sharing, and I said, I completely understand where you're coming from. If I were in your shoes, I might think that as well. I promise you that's not what happened. What happened was we hit some turbulence that we didn't foresee. We thought we knew where we were going. We thought we knew what was happening. And actually, we then got hit with with another financial burden that we just couldn't overcome. And that's the reason we're here. And I remember a bit later on in the day, that lady came to find me to apologise. And I said, please don't apologise to me. I delivered a really, really awful message. And you were quite right to be angry. You have every right to be angry because you have to live with that. And I remember going back at the end of that day, back to the main office. We were over 4 different sites. And I saw my boss who said, I've had the worst day. And I was like, you really haven't? And he went, okay, yeah, no, you've had the worst day. And I was like, no, I really haven't. My really bad day was yesterday. My bad day was last night when I went home knowing nothing was going to change the fact that today I had to get up and tell these people that their jobs were at risk. I get to go home tonight and my worst bit's over. All those people that I told have to go home tonight and tell their families, tell their loved ones, tell the people around them that this change is coming and that they've now got to think about how do they move forward with that and how do they move forward in a position where they're unharmed. Because for me, that's one of the biggest challenges when we make people redundant is we don't take the time to let them know it's not about them. It wasn't because of something they did. It was because of what the organisation did. And so you see those people harmed by the situation. They are scared going into their next job it's going to happen again. They think it's about them. And I've met over the years many people who've been made redundant time and time again because they believe that that's going to be what happens. One of the things I'm most proud of is the first one I ever ran. 98% of the people had a job by the point that we actually closed the site somewhere else. And that was because we engaged with local businesses. We went to the council, we went to every organisation we could think of and said, these are great people. They're not in this position because they're not brilliant employees. They're in this position because of what happened to the organisation and the situation that we were in. And as a result of that, they went on to be hugely successful and to continue to thrive. And I think for me, they're the parts that probably looking back at my career have been those moments where I learned something and I grew. It was that willingness to be vulnerable. It was that passion of curiosity. One of the things that I used to ask in every organisation I ever went into is go and speak to the people up the front line, the people that are doing the job every day, and say, can you tell me what the silliest thing is that we make you do? What is it we make you do every day that you go, no idea. Why are we doing this? It makes no sense. Because that is often the kingpin to unlocking an organisation. Because either it will just be really silly and it will have happened many years ago and it's now just become part of the fabric. It's the thing that's hiding in plain sight. And so we can stop that and say, we don't need to do that. There's no requirement for the organisation, for the regulator, for the client, or for yourself. So we can call quits to that. Or it will be something that needs to be done, but we've not explained why it needs to be done. And so the people doing it are just left with a feeling of frustration that, look at the silly things they make me do every day. And there's no reason for this. So very often it will identify either something that's missing in our communication or something that is missing in our process improvement. But I used to think that that was just because I wasn't very bright, instead of realizing now it was because I was willing to be vulnerable and curious. And so I thought I would share in today's episode the power of that curiosity, that asking more questions, seeking to understand the other person's point of view as a way of really trying to develop yourself and them. Because when you ask them more questions, they'll ask you more questions. It suddenly becomes more about a position of inquiry. I do it with my little girl all the time. Instead of just immediately deciding that she wants an answer, very often she just wants a debate. She wants to be able to use her own powers of thought, imagination, curiosity to make her own decision, to make her own opinion. And so instead of just saying, well, the answer's this, so, well, okay, what do you think the answer might be? I can tell you what I think it might be, and then we can share, does that seem right? Does that not seem right? Where do we go from that? But it takes a little bit more time to do that. It takes a little bit more time to help people remain curious. And I saw the other day, and it was really heartbreaking. We were walking back from school, and my little girl was, massively in using her imagination. And she got back told by one of the other children, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't use your imagination. And I was like, why? I said, as long as we're honest and we say, I'm imagining, rather than making out it happened and that we believe it to be true, which is a lie, we should always use our imagination. Because once we stop learning and we stop being curious and we stop imagining, then that would mean we'd never, ever be better than we are right now in this moment. And that, for me, just feels too sad. So I'm trying really hard, not just in work, but outside of work, to go, there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a way where, with the power of curiosity and the willingness to be vulnerable and be different, that we can actually make a breakthrough and learn something different. My grandparents gave me, in my opinion, two really great pieces of advice. My nan said, every day should be a school day. In every day, we should learn something or learn how to do something differently. And my granddad said, live each day as if it should last, and one day you'll be right. And I took from that what he means is, don't put off till tomorrow something you can do today, because tomorrow isn't promised. And so I try now every day to do both of those. And it was on their advice that I decided for today's episode, I would just come on my own. I wouldn't come on and interview somebody else. I'd be vulnerable and curious about how it might land and just come and share a little bit more about me. So thank you to everybody who has been watching and listening. I hope it's been useful, and you'll be pleased to know next time I will have a guest. Thank you all. Take care.